This place has welcomed travelers for generations, where journeys of hope began, where survivors found sanctuary, live stories of courage in the darkest times of ordinary people choosing to be extraordinary. This is Hear My Story.
I'm Brittany Pavley, the Director of Youth and Professional Learning, and I'm thrilled to be here today with this incredible woman. Her name's Verjine, and she is an Upstander Award winner and someone who does great work advocating for those who are often left behind. So, Verjine, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. Congratulations again on your award.
Thank you.
You won the Judge Walter Wertheim Award for Fairness at the 2025 Upstander Awards. A little bit about Judge Wertheim. He was born in Germany in 1925, and after Kristallnacht, he traveled alone on the Kindertransport to England. And he was 14 at that time. Eventually, he was able to reunite with his father in the U.S., and once here in America, he graduated high school at 16 and enlisted in the U.S. Army. After his service, he settled in Cleveland, and he was an administrative law judge. He raised his family, and we thought it was important to name this award after him because he felt really strongly about educating about the Holocaust and preventing hate. So after having said all of that, right, how does this award particularly resonate with you and the work that you do?
Honestly, first it was very overwhelming, and I'm so grateful to not only the judge, but his family and everything that, they have gone through, and to then be able to pay it forward by investing in Upstander and all that goes into it was really meaningful for me and my family who was there at the gala. So that was really, really important. And what I really loved about the judge's story was how I kind of mirrored my own experiences through his, just his legacy of being a transplant and moving around so many places, whether it be because he had no choice, and then ultimately finding his home in Ohio, kind of like how my family found its home in Ohio. So that's that, at least on a personal level, that was meaningful. Professionally, he wanted to make the best of his life and to help others and to get into law, which is what I sometimes, I'm amazed that I'm even able to do this and have the opportunity to do the work that I love to do. So I really loved just how that resonated with me. And so I'm always really grateful.
Yeah, and you sound very humble. You're practicing your humility too, because you do excellent work in the field of law, right? Just like he did. And so can you tell me, so the thing about the award for fairness, which is interesting, is fairness is actually one of the top high-ranking character strengths of people who are involved in the field of law. And so do you find that, A, is fairness in your top character strengths, do you think? And B, how do you see that kind of play out on the day-to-day?
I think you value and understand fairness more when you witness unfairness. And when you have that sense of justice or feeling of indignity violated in a way. So at least for me, wanting to go into law, I think it's more and more me witnessing injustice or witnessing unfairness and just being very upset about it, very overwhelmed by it. I have family members who tell me all the time I may not have stuck up for myself if I was younger. I didn't like the confrontation when I was a little girl.
Sure.
But when it came to sticking up for my little brother or sticking up for some kid in the neighborhood, that I found the energy for. That I found the sense of conviction for. So when it comes to, going to court and sticking up for other people, that's not a problem.
Yeah.
Hopefully I don't have to go to court for myself for any reason, but it's not a problem when you just hear what other people are going through, and it's solely because of lack of resources or lack of knowledge about our system or being in the wrong place at the wrong time and experiencing one adversity after another. You find yourself filled with that energy and that sense of, no, I want to stick up for this person.
Yeah. It sounds like fairness is probably in your top character strengths for sure. And it's interesting too how you can kind of like relate the way in which you use fairness to be activated for doing good, right? And so when you see that lack of fairness, that's like your boiling point or your activation point where you feel like, yeah, I'm ready to take this on now. Well, thank you for explaining all of that. So you've kind of mentioned it a little bit already, but your family is from Armenia, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And so can you tell us about them and what you know about your family history and story?
Yeah, so telling that my immediate family is from Armenia, that's usually the shorter story that I tell because it's just easier. But I was reflecting on that, in preparation for this conversation, and I realized that we've never had more than 2 generations born in any given place. And that has been our family story for as long as we've had a family story. Wow. So being in the United States, being in Ohio, we've already have 2 generations here. So, if we have one more generation, we'll be breaking a record that we haven't broken in a while. But I say that to mean that when you have this global experience and this diaspora experience, being a survivor of a horrible tragedy that forces that migration, it changes not only the identity of your family, but also how you respond to the life that you're living. So 3 of my grandparents are descendants of Armenian genocide survivors. My paternal great-grandparents were orphaned, and they actually met at the orphanage that they survived and escaped to. So by being from the former Ottoman Empire and what is now Turkey, my last name actually is made up. So when my great-grandfather, he went to the orphanage, he was too young to know what his real last name was. But they did know this child was from the city of Adana in Turkey. So that's why my last name is Adanalian, because they wanted to assign him a last name so they knew where he came from. So it wasn't until many, many years later that we discovered what my real last name is. But I'm happy for the last name that I have because it really just shows that legacy of, regardless of what we understand about the Armenian genocide, how it is understood or acknowledged, whether locally, politically, or globally. Right. I'm proof that it happened, and I have family members who survived it and also survived migration.
Yeah, which is a whole nother thing that we could talk about, right? Yeah. Is this kind of like common linkage, not only through your family history with genocide, but also through your family history of being migrants for generations, right? And so when we think about the stories that we tell here about our survivors, right, our museum isn't just a history of the Holocaust and the history of that one global event, but it's also a history of what it's like to be an immigrant in Cincinnati, right? And what it's like to be a refugee and how folks cope and build community, right, despite the circumstance. Right. And so is there anything that you'd like to share or talk more about in terms of how does your family end up here in Cincinnati or in Ohio?
Oh, gosh. I'll give you the abridged version of it. Superficially, we had a family member who was here through business, and he really appreciated the nature, weirdly enough. So we initially immigrated to Los Angeles, and it's not the same nature. So
little different.
So experiencing fall and winter here reminded him so much of Armenia, my uncle, of Armenia so much that he just felt the pull to be in that. And it's weird to think that like an environment can actually make you feel nostalgic or longing for something that you can't return to. So he went back to LA and said, yeah, we got to get out of here.
This is it. So I found it. I found Cincinnati.
Right. So they moved here. Everyone was always so nice and community oriented, which is so much like Armenia and how our culture is there. So once we settled, we settled. Yeah. So we came here in the mid-90s. Okay. And I was about 4 years old when we came to Cincinnati. So it's we love to tell anyone who didn't make it out here our reasons for why we stayed, and a lot of it has to do with just sense of community, sense of family, and we experienced that with the way other people experience Cincinnati. Because all my classmates, they had parents and grandparents who probably went to the same school.
Sure.
They are from the same neighborhoods. They were played under the same trees. We didn't have that.
Right.
And the only way that I can experience that is if I go to Armenia just to see what my parents went through. But then I would have to go to Lebanon to see what my grandparents experienced, or I would have to go to Syria to see what my other grandparents experienced, what tree did they sit under. So I think I love that a lot about what my friends got by having that, just even having a familiar corner or someplace that they went to. So my brother and I, we went to school here, we went to college here, we have a life here, and every time we travel and we come back to Cincinnati, we feel like that relief, like that anxious relief. It's really hard to describe, but
the feeling of home.
Yeah, and just familiarity. My parents moved around before they came to Cincinnati, so even for them, the familiarity of where did they raise their kids, that is strengthening roots that they're very delicate. Like when they keep getting pulled out from the soil and put somewhere else, it takes time for those roots to get thicker and to really meld into the place. So it matters, that sense of home.
Sure. And I'm so glad that it's here in Cincinnati. I think that it's really interesting that your uncle, you said, right, felt like this, you mentioned kind of like longing, right? Or this like feeling of this is similar to home, or maybe this sense of safety, right? Of that familiarity that you're talking about. Yeah. Well, thanks for talking us through that. So you've spent your whole career essentially advocating for human rights and helping people who've been victimized. Human trafficking is something that you're particularly passionate about. And we wanted to ask you, what should we know, the general public know about human trafficking, and what are some commonly held misconceptions? Let's set the record straight, hearing from an expert here.
So this topic is very, very less stressful for me than the previous one. So glad that you asked. So what is really important about understanding human trafficking, what it is as a concept, we have a lot of ideas because of the media that we consume. But in the legal world, our idea and the way that human trafficking is defined as a crime is very young, actually. So the crime of human trafficking did not really go into the books and was not defined until the year 2000 during the Palermo Protocol. So when you're talking about the law of people in existence, that's nothing.
Right.
And when we're talking about the reliefs and the laws and structures that were created in Ohio to provide, safeties for survivors of human trafficking didn't really hit our books until about 2012. So we're dealing with something that every year we're learning more and more about. And some of the big myth busters that I try to do the most is this doesn't just happen to random people somewhere that you don't have to think about. And no one's immune from this. I've had clients who are victimized from all socioeconomic backgrounds, all race, all creed, all gender, all. So I've had survivors who came from very affluent families, places where you would never think that someone would be susceptible to victimization like that. But what we don't want to talk about is the vulnerabilities that survivors initially have that make them prey to victimization. And there's no income standard for that. There's nothing that really sets somebody apart from that. And that obviously gets way more exacerbated with social media and some of the other more high-risk avenues that especially young people have to be susceptible to people who have ill intent. So what the biggest takeaway that I would have about human trafficking, what is it locally? It's a homegrown problem. It's not a foreign problem as much as we would like to think that it is. Of course, we do have labor trafficking. There is sex trafficking that foreign-born populations are vulnerable to, but every single one of my clients for the past 7 years, homegrown, born USA, Cincinnati, Ohio, or at least in our region. So this isn't something that just happens to other people.
Yeah.
This is something that could happen to someone I know, someone you know, anybody,
Right.
God forbid. But
Yeah.
it's something that, it's not only for certain people.
Right. Yeah. I'm glad that you're addressing that, because I think in our common conception and maybe cultural understanding, like you've said, we have this version of human trafficking in our minds that you're telling us doesn't align with the reality of what we're facing in our community or in communities like ours. Right. And so how do everyday people in Cincinnati, right? How do we become more aware of the actual problem? How do we learn more about the signs and these types of victimization that you're talking about? And how do we, be upstanders for this specific group of people?
First and foremost, this victimization happens in isolation. Not only the victim being isolated, but the victim being pulled into isolation, either by the trafficker or the circumstances. Many of the trafficking situations has to do between personal relationships. That can be a romantic partner, that can be a family member, which includes parents, unfortunately. It is very rarely a stranger danger experience. So when we have someone who has targeted someone potentially for victimization, there is a gradual luring involved in this, and it's not always so nefarious. So we might have situations where it starts off as a loving relationship, an attraction, and that is how it kind of feeds into what's going on. Like with personal relationships, latching onto those vulnerabilities, so much easier. Because
manipulating those.
Because then you start sensing, what is this person's insecurities? What is this person's vulnerabilities? What are they afraid of? What do they need that you can give them, then hold it against them? Are they struggling economically? Are they struggling with family relationships? Are they just not feeling like they fit in the community? Do they even have a community? So when somebody smells that out in something, in a person, they know what they're looking for. They're not going for somebody who is well-connected, strong, enduring relationships, visible and thriving in the community and in their own lives. They're not necessarily going for those people. They're going for somebody who feels very lonely, feels their sense of value is precarious, and having one person come and say, I value you, I see you, I will love you in ways that no one else will.
That draws them in.
So what I try to say for folks who want to be aware of this and want to, be resistant to this happening in their communities, fight back against the isolation.
Sure.
Being connected on social media and liking someone's picture doesn't mean you know what's going on with them. How are they doing personally?
Right.
What are their fears? What are their aspirations? And how are they coping with an ever complicated, scary, stressful life that we're all experiencing at some point or another?
Yeah. Well, thanks for bringing that to our attention. I mean, that's the great part of us partnering with the VIA Institute and their emphasis on what do thriving people look like, right? How can we focus on building a community through these positive relationships, right? And support systems in order to empower everybody, no matter who they are or no matter what their background is or what their character strengths are, right? To come together for good, right? And so I'm heartened that by doing the work of building positive belonging and community, right, we're doing more than just helping people be more connected, but there's other things, like you're saying, human trafficking, that could decline because of this kind of overarching goal of building this community.
Yeah, and I would say, at least with lawyering, it's not always just going to court and yapping and being argumentative. Like my main task every day that I think is the most important task that I have is humanizing people and being able to tell their stories in a way that does them justice.
Yeah.
Because if we're talking about at least just the criminal legal system, more often than not, the true context or someone's real story does not come out for various reasons. And we can have a totally different conversation about that. But I always feel no matter what the result is, if I feel that my client can then turn to me and say, like, okay, you did my story justice. Like, I'm good with whatever happens. That's the win.
Yeah, that's what you're doing it for.
Yeah, and the reason I bring that up is if you're working with a victim of crime, or, even if you're doing contract law, it doesn't have to be as saucy as what I do sometimes, but look into people's humanity.
Right.
We so quickly want to just skip to the conclusion or like skip to the to-do list.
Right.
There's so much context in why people do the things they do, even if they're bad things.
Right.
So taking a beat and actually having that conversation, that's when you really pull out the pieces of what is fairness, what is justice, what can we actually do to make sure the community is whole, a victim of crime is whole, a perpetrator gets the right consequences to hopefully rehabilitate and not do this again.
Right.
These are all different players when we're talking about a criminal proceeding, right? So it's not only just a law was broken, we have to punish this person. There's a lot of players involved in this.
Yeah. And a lot of gray area.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Not
we don't like that.
Yeah, not everything is so black and white, even in a field that intentionally tries to make things so clear and concise.
Yeah. It makes us so uncomfortable. I don't know whether it's just we want to get to the happy ever after or get to the end of the video or not spend more than 5 seconds of our attention on something, but so much gets lost and broken and never said. And when someone is not heard that first time, it makes it really hard for them to talk the second time because you've already broken that trust.
Yeah.
Society has already broken that trust in you. So if I even get somebody to share what's happened to them, I'm very grateful because many, many times before they met me, someone's already told them they're unimportant.
Wow.
So.
Yeah, you're really elevating that humanity and being a voice for these people, right? And one thing that you have talked about before, right, is the importance of not approaching your position as this kind of savior position, right, or this kind of rescuer position. You've talked about that your clients are really strong survivors, right, and they need your specific knowledge, right, to along their journeys. And so that is such great humanizing advice. And so what other advice would you be willing to share with us in our journey towards more humanity, greater fairness, right, in our effort to be upstanders for people too?
I would say don't try to do everything that's possible. Have a moment to think about, like, what is your strength and what's one thing that you just do so well. Yeah. Where you can do that one thing really well and let someone else do something else that they're really good at in more of this team experience. Yeah. So I say that with, I've always felt one of my strengths were building bridges, whether that be helping people communicate between if they don't understand each other, whether that be literal language barriers. Like my grandma she wants to return these shoes and you're not understanding her. So that's literally like making that translation, but also mediating conversation, because when you are first generation to an immigrant family and you live your American life and you understand American culture and how things happen in society, but you also understand the culture you come from home. So very quickly I realized that one of my favorite things to do is smooth that road. Yeah. So there would be more crossing over where it wouldn't just be, well, I don't want to talk to those people. I don't speak their language. But I learned that a lot from my grandpa, who passed last year, and his English was not good, but he had so many friends, like so many people in the neighborhood would just come, and I'm like, what are you people talking about? Yeah. And he would just find ways with his special little way that they were just,
personality.
and I don't know whether they were just, I found these really great bananas in the grocery store. Have a banana. I'm like, don't give bananas to strangers. But he didn't know a stranger.
Oh,
So
wow.
that was something that I think me, my brother, my cousins, we absorbed, that there's more that unites us than separates us. So I felt like I wanted to practice that as much as possible and help people just talk to each other. So I loved writing. I liked communicating and talking, bringing people together and talking. But there's just some things that I'm not good at, and I'm not going to pretend to be good at it. And that's okay. Because if I spread myself too thin, I can't get the chance to do what I'm really good at.
Right.
So when we have folks who are just so anxious, thinking, there's just so much to do, there's so many broken pieces, like, where do I start? What are you good at? I have a friend who's really good at planning events.
Yeah, I know.
I'm not that person. I like going to those well-planned events, but that brings you joy.
Right.
Great.
Yeah.
There's other things that bring me joy, that when we come together collectively as a unit, that's a pretty great unit. So I think we underestimate that. Big or small, we bring something to the table.
Yeah.
And we don't always have to be so loud about it. Some of the greatest advocates are quiet and good planners and thoughtful and compassionate, and they see the things that maybe the folks who they're really, really good at talking are too busy talking.
Right. To notice.
To notice that. So big or small, I think every person brings something of value to the table.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't necessarily compare ourselves, because what a wasted opportunity.
Well, and it goes back to what you were saying before about how these people that you are working with and helping to represent, right? There's no, specific person, right, who becomes involved in human trafficking, right? And just because they are a victim in this regard, right, doesn't mean that they don't continue to add value, right, to their community, to their family, right? And so I hear that coming through in your response, and really kind of weaving beautifully with your idea that while these people may be victims of one thing, there's not like a superhero rescuer that's going to put all of those pieces back together, right? It's about seeing what we all have and seeing how we can all kind of work together to contribute to making that kind of more just community world and to continue that thread of fairness.
Well, it also helps you keep in perspective what your real responsibility is.
Yeah.
Because when I'm working with clients, if I took responsibility for everything, what would they have to hold on to for their own agency?
Sure.
So I think about that, like, okay, this is the one thing that, this is my domain, this is what I can do. But I give tasks and responsibilities to my clients over their own life.
Sure.
Like I say, we need these documents. You're the only person who can get it. I believe in you. Go do that.
Right.
And they do. So less and less taking agency away from victims who, that's the core of their victimization, their agency was taken from them. That's how you start really helping someone rebuild, because they're rebuilding.
Right.
You're just kind of modeling that behavior of what's appropriate.
Yeah.
There are things that I say, you know what, you don't have to worry about that. That's my job. And there's a sense of comfort in that. But by
can't do everything.
No, and you really shouldn't, because that's hard as an advocate. You don't want to burn out and take responsibility for a system that is flawed. Take responsibility for every good or not so good result that happens, because you're going to win some and you're going to lose some.
Sure.
To be an upstander and an advocate for the long term, it's a marathon. It is not a race. So the quicker someone can really, really take that to their heart, the more resilient they'll be to the difficulties.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really good advice. I do want to ask you, when you get a win for a client, you were just talking about how there's a lot of wins and there's going to be some losses too, right? and they get to move forward and have a fresh start, right? What's that feeling like for you? What's that feeling like for them? Talk us through the ideal outcomes, right, of your cases.
So let's say the client gets everything that they want. I think if this was a movie, like cinematically, we would have orchestra.
Sure.
And, like,
There's a balloon
moment,
release.
like moment. It more feels like this silent bucket of ice water just dumping on the client because their adversity has been on them like chains for so long that they got so used to the weight of that now it's having to reprogram and think about life differently, which is scary.
Focus.
It's scary. It's overwhelming. It can be daunting. Even habits of, they've had to explain, let's say every time they had to apply for a job, they had a criminal record that would come up that is more of a reflection of their victimization than of their actual decision making. They were so used to not applying to things.
Sure.
Or if they did apply for something, immediately like stealing up because they had to tell a really uncomfortable story in a very reduced version.
Right.
Because I don't think anyone is really giving anyone else the time of day to talk about their life story for an hour. So not having to do that anymore, it's more, I've had clients like look at me like deer in the headlights and they're like, well, what do I do now?
Right.
And I look at them and be like, whatever you want.
Yeah.
I'm done here. But no, and I do keep in touch with many of my former clients because they have gone on to do really incredible things for our community, and that really means a lot. But yeah, it's almost just like a high school senior. You're asking them like, well, so what are you going to do?
You're on the precipice of the rest of your life.
Right. And it could be something as simple as, someone in their 60s where this is the first time they have to pick outfits that they like or even have a favorite color. Because these are all things that, there are some trafficking experiences where you don't get to have a favorite color. Your favorite color is my favorite color, right? So something as simple that we take for granted that, I got to choose this top.
Right.
I mean, I've had former clients ask me, like, do you think this is cute? Like, is this stylish? I'm like, it's as cute as you want it to be. If you like it, it's cute.
Right.
So it's the soft things, and it's not only about like the legal result.
Right.
Oftentimes I've also had to deal with just the social ramifications of what does this mean? And I think that that's what devastated me the most about this crime, or just crime in general, is that, yeah, there's one thing on paper, but what people are experiencing when the sun goes down, when they're back at home, when they're by themselves, do they feel safe? Do they feel lonely again? Are they reverting back to the sufferings that kind of pulled them into that situation in the first place? So I was always really, really nervous when COVID first happened because that isolation, I was so nervous for my clients because I was worried that if they didn't have their community, if they weren't out and about, if they didn't get that reminder that they're not alone, I was afraid of what that would snowball into. And unfortunately, for certain circumstances, it did snowball.
Wow.
So isolation is the poison.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
And so after this kind of fresh start, I mean, your duties as their attorney are kind of over.
Yeah.
But you still see yourself supporting them socially, emotionally, continuing to make sure that they don't slide back into that isolation.
And if they mess up, that's okay.
Yeah.
And I try to tell them, like, that's okay. Like, you don't have to be this perfect victim story. Like, again, Hollywood movie.
Right.
They triumph. We have relapses.
Yeah.
We have circumstances. Again, a lot of these bad situations had to do with personal relationships. Sometimes children are involved and shared.
Right.
It's not just something you can dissect from your life that easily. So it's just really learning, what are boundaries? What are my boundaries? What are your boundaries? Am I violating that? So the things that you would think we learned maybe adolescence or our teen years,
Yeah.
going straight back to that mindset. and growing and maturing and learning.
Yeah.
Because trauma changes the brain. It changes our behavior, the way that we understand things, our level of patience. It gets impacted. There's a whole lot of things that trauma impacts. So just being mindful of that and giving people some grace, because they might mess up. They might come back to my office. All right, let's do it again.
Let's figure it out.
That's fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fine.
What a good attitude to have, right? Because again, that's that humanizing attitude. I mean, we all make mistakes, right? You said there is no perfect victim.
No.
And the only thing that you can do is move through those mistakes and learn from them, right? And if we're constantly demonizing people, then is there any growth happening?
And it's very easy for me to talk at others, like these lofty little bits that I'm sharing, but it took a long time even for me to internalize it.
Oh, sure.
Because when you're a first generation American, again, to immigrant families, especially with the legacy that we come from, you just want to strive for the best. You want to always be happy. You want to always be successful. You want to do more.
Pressure.
Right. Like it's not enough to just exist.
Sure.
So with that, sometimes you create these very unrealistic expectations, not only of yourself, but of others. And if I did something that wasn't up to my standard, oh my gosh.
Right.
Putting myself to time out.
Right.
Like my parents never had to discipline me. I did that myself. So like my parents would come and be like, it's okay. I'm like, no, it's not. But this is why, like, knowing that as much as I want to give grace to other people, I should give it to myself as well.
Yeah.
I'm not writing this odyssey about my family's legacy where my winning is tied to their surviving.
Right.
And my failure is not, it's not a betrayal of their legacy.
Sure.
And I needed to remember that, because when you're a kid and you're just like, man, I can't believe Grandpa survived this. Man, I can't believe he brought us here. Wow, I can't believe Mom and Dad did this. You feel like, okay, well, it has to be for something. Like, we got to do this for something.
Now what's going to be my great thing?
Exactly. And so even just like the concept of taking a step back and practicing self-care and all those things.
Relaxing a little bit.
Yeah, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And so when I say this to my clients, half the time I'm saying it to myself, because I'm sure there are other kids of immigrant families who felt like, no, I have to succeed. Right. Otherwise, everything that they lost was for nothing.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of pressure. And I'm not going to lie, I still feel that sometimes.
Sure.
If I'm making a career decision, if I'm making a personal decision, it's not always a solo choice for me.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm thinking like, well, is this good for my parents? Is this good for me? Should I stay in Cincinnati? Should I go? Like, already difficult decisions amplify a little bit, because you're not only thinking about you have the ghost of people here and not here.
Yeah, your ancestors are behind you, watching you, right?
Right.
I understand. Yeah, give yourself a little bit of a break. I think if you didn't do anything past today, you'd still make your family exceptionally proud.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But thank you. I'll just
She says, but I'm going to try to practice some of that self-care and just take the compliment. Yeah. Okay. So just a few more questions for you.
Yeah.
We're almost through them. For those who haven't been victimized, or maybe those who are trying to navigate the legal system, searching for their own justice.
Yeah.
Can you share a story without violating any confidentiality that illustrates why advocates like you are so necessary in this system that we're working in?
Oh gosh, I feel now more than ever, just the availability of resources that are either affordable or free is more difficult now than I think ever. You know, and I don't only say that for folks who don't have any resources. I would say that even for those who are middle class.
Yeah.
You know, like, that really gets into your mind space of figuring out, do I actually want to fight for my justice, or will this bankrupt me?
Right.
Can I just, you know, sweep this under the rug and find a way to get over it?
Yeah, I'm trying to move on.
And so I think that part always kind of bothered me the most is that there may be people out there who have very viable, legitimate claims, things that they're entitled to legally, that they just do not pursue it. A, because they don't know what happened to them as a crime, which is the first problem. I can't tell you how many survivors came to my office looking for one thing, like just trying to get help finding a job. And after our conversations, I'm like, okay, there's something else.
Story here.
There is. And that could be either normalized abuse is one thing. They might be from, there's intergenerational abuse that's happened. So for them, it's normalized. They might see it in their own families. They might see it in their neighborhoods. It's not something that they ever thought, well, this isn't normal, right? This is not right. So first is even self-identification is so hard. You know, I think access to more information has made that better, but at the same time, it also feeds a lot of confusion. So when there's too much wrong information, that's a problem too. I can't tell you how many times I've been to court and I hear just random people just giving each other legal advice, and none of them are lawyers.
No,
none of them are like, it's just, this happened to my Uncle Bob.
Oh yeah.
This will happen for you. And that might just dissuade somebody from getting help or even seeing that what they're going through is actually a problem.
Right.
So that's kind of like a roundabout way of saying that I would say 95% of my clients did not know they were victims of human trafficking before they came to my office. They had never heard those words before. If I would have led with those words, they might have shut down because it seems so sterile in a way, those words. Just like, you don't label yourself like that. Yeah. But if I started asking questions like, well, what was that relationship like? How did you guys meet? When did drugs come into your life? Had you experienced substance abuse? Like, who showed you that the first time?
Right.
Oh, it was mom? What was life like with mom? Oh, it didn't start with mom. What was that like? So it's just like building that interview style in a way where it's not just, here's my clipboard, I'm going through a checklist. And that is only possible when you have exposure to enough stories to recognize patterns.
Right.
And I know I speak from privilege now because I'm on the other side of that. Like, I know what those patterns are. But when you first start out in this space, especially like new grads or like new lawyers are just like, I'm so nervous not to look like a lawyer.
Yeah.
The best interviews I had was wearing jeans and and trying to be cool. Most of the time.
Humanizing yourself along with the person that you're talking to.
Yes. And the hardest part were my clients, especially when I first started, I guess looked young and they were just like, please, why are you here? And I get it. I don't know if I would have been happy to see me.
Somebody with gray hair and a gray suit.
I got that now, girl. It's fine. But back then, I was very like squirrely. I was like, am I saying the wrong thing? No. We just forgotten how to talk to people.
Yeah.
And sometimes if that means I have to ask them, what's their zodiac sign? Oh, they love telling me about why their Gemini boyfriend was a problem.
Right.
No. Like,
right.
It's a way to kind of break the ice a little bit. And just, I get to be human with them, and we get to go on a journey of talking about horrific things that you sometimes don't even know how to put words to. But you get there gradually. You don't just pop in and say, well, tell me about the worst day of your life.
Right.
I'm taking notes.
Yeah.
No.
You have to build a rapport.
Exactly. And sometimes that means I have to listen to what they like to do after school in the 6th grade. I don't know how that impacts what you did when you're in 40, but let's start there, I guess.
Yeah.
Right? So what I would say for new advocates who either they want to do this as a volunteer or they want to make this their main career, take your time and put your preconceived ideas of what this is away. You're only going to learn about human trafficking or any kind of crime or anything about the law when you start talking to people and seeing how it plays out.
Yeah.
Because it plays out differently in different communities. And I know my community, but I'm not going to say that I am part of every community in Cincinnati.
Right. And so you have to be humble enough to learn, to maybe ask some silly questions or maybe look silly or, you know, be vulnerable in a way.
Yeah.
And all of that will pay off in the relationships that you can build from that.
And I realized that from, again, the skill that I was bringing from my childhood. I knew that I was different, I didn't let that hold me back, but that required me to listen a little harder, look at things a little harder. Why are the dynamics the way that they are? So I brought that to my interview style. I wanted to hear, well, I'm going to mirror your word choice. I'm not going to use my legalese.
Sure.
I'm going to hear why you talk or you call your mom, but you call your dad that guy, you know? So these are all clues that we turn ourselves off to because we're looking for ourselves in other people. You can't do this work if you're looking for yourself in other people, unless, even if you had been a victim yourself, even that's not helpful because you're
totally
looking for yourself.
different.
Exactly. You're looking for yourself. So the more you can kind of sit back and just hear and see people, even if there's nothing you can do, sometimes that's all they need.
Yeah. Well, thanks. I have one last question for you. What is your definition of an upstander, and how has that evolved or changed over time?
I think the first time that I heard of upstander, I think the first word that just like blasted in my mind was just having courage. And that can be courage to do an action or the courage to do an inaction. In the context of what I'm doing, being an upstander required me to do an action. Like there are things I had to do. But some of the inactions was listening to the real experts in the room, which might not be me. And, you know, the follow-up action to that can be, you know, how can I amplify this other voice? How can I understand what this person needs, and do they need that from me? Sometimes the best thing to do is get out of people's way because it might not be me that they need. So as an upstander, having the grace or like the humility to not want to be the hero in the story, and that's okay. If you need to step aside, that's what you need to do. But having the sensitivity to know when action is needed and when inaction is needed. And I don't say inaction as like passively letting injustice happen, of course, but even choosing not to do something is sometimes the right choice. So having the courage and the sense of conviction to do that without being afraid that you're going to be judged or criticized, because you might get criticism that you chose not to do something maybe. But I really support folks who take in all that information, ask the person what do they need, and if that means you going and finding someone else to do the job, no skin off my back. I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, because you want the best outcome for whatever problem you're trying to tackle.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, I hear a lot of fairness, right? But I've said it already, but humility and love for the people that you're working with, for your family, for our city, right? And all of these things combining to definitely make you an upstander. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Of course.
Hear My Story is a production of the Nancy and David Wolf Holocaust and Humanity Center. The center's mission is to ensure that the lessons of the Holocaust inspire action today. This is part of the Cynthia and Harold Gutman Family Center for Storytelling. Thanks to Margaret and Michael Valentine for their ongoing support of this series. Managing producer is Ann Thompson, technical producer is Robert Mills, and technical director is Josh Emerson. Select music is by Kik Lee. This is recorded at the Nancy and David Wolf Holocaust and Humanity Center. Visit us in person at Historic Union Terminal in Cincinnati, Ohio, or online anytime at holocaustandhumanity.org.